All right. Thank you all for being here tonight. Happy to have you joining us on Zoom. We'd like to record tonight's program if everyone's okay with that, and then it will air on the city's YouTube channel and also community television as well. If you have any questions along the way, please feel free to put them in the chat box. Those will come to me, and then I will compile those for Lisabeth so that she can answer those. I had the pleasure of reading an advance copy of Baby and Solo, and I'm really thrilled to have Lisabeth here tonight. And a big thanks to Dan Duffey of Berkley Schools for participating as well. Lisabeth Posthuma is a devotee of obscure documentaries about drive-ins, a lover of rotary telephones, and a trophy-winning champion of TV trivia. She resides in Michigan with her two parakeets, Tiki, Bon Jovi, and Alaska Riggins. Lisabeth, welcome, and I'll turn it over to you.
Hey, everyone.
I'll start with, how big is this trivia trophy? Because I don't know.
It's very small, and I will say that it came from a children's museum. I don't know if that gives me more or less street cred.
More, definitely
but
more.
We won, so I'm very proud of it.
Excellent. So thanks again, Matt. I'm excited to be here too. I finished the book recently and loved it, and I was happy that they asked me to help out with this interview. So I can just start right away by just out of curiosity, where did you get the idea for this book, and what would you like to talk about to begin?
Well, where did I get the idea? I had actually started writing this book in 2014, which I had just come off of writing my first book, actually, which I ended up self-publishing that one. So when Baby and Solo is called my debut novel, it's debut in terms of it being traditionally published. So I had just written this book, and I really loved the process. I loved writing, and I wanted to do something different, and I wanted to try and get it traditionally published. So I started thinking just about what I was passionate about, things that I felt I could write another story about. And I had worked in a video store in the 90s for about 7 years, off and on, between high school and college. And I just absolutely loved it. I think it'll always be my favorite job. And I just thought, like, that is a really fun setting. And I love stories that have ensemble casts. So, and stories where the setting is also a character. And so I wanted to take a stab at trying to create one of those worlds.
Awesome. Yeah, and it takes place at a video store in the 90s, and the 90s are a huge theme of this book. I have to imagine that you're a big 90s fan, and the 90s comeback is maybe even bigger now than when you started writing. How have you embraced this 90s comeback along with the process of writing the book?
I would say, like, when I started writing the book, the 90s were not super popular. They kind of became more so through the course of writing the book, which I found exciting. I mean, I do love the 90s, but I really love pretty much all of the decades from like the 1950s on. Just a big fan of pop culture of the second half of the 20th century. But the 90s is the decade that I came of age. And so it's obviously the one that I have the most lived experience in. So that's not to say that I wouldn't ever set a book in a decade that I didn't come of age in, but it was just really fun to revisit that. Especially like all the movies and the music. It made for having some really fun soundtracks as I was writing.
Absolutely. Music was a big part. I mean, it takes place in a video store, but music seemed to be a big part. You were just mentioning that the 90s was kind of your time going through this, so I imagine that music still has influence with you. Can you talk about how your musical interests in terms of, do they mirror kind of the book, or did you kind of have to dig a little deeper and come up with some new things?
Sure. I mean, I'm definitely from the MTV generation, and I was definitely watching MTV when I was much too young to be watching MTV. I remember being like
My
5
parents
years
didn't let
old.
me watch it at home,
Oh,
but I could sneak it at the friend's house every once in a while.
I don't know that my parents knew I watched it, but
Right.
definitely at 5 years old, the Thriller video was on pretty much 24/7 on MTV, and it definitely scared me to death. Yeah, I was watching MTV back when Remote Control, the game show, was a thing, so I was very, very young. And that kind of just continued pretty much my whole life, and just really loved music. And all genres of music too. My first concert was a Pearl Jam concert at Soldier Field in Chicago. And I definitely leaned more towards the grunge music, I think, when I was a young teen. But in terms of what music did I have to like research to do this book, I will say that before I wrote this book, I was really indifferent about Bon Jovi. Like I didn't really, could have taken him or left him, didn't really have much of an opinion. But through developing the character who actually does have an affinity for Bon Jovi, I grew to have a deep affection for him. And
as do many others.
And
okay.
researching him as a person, like he's a philanthropist. He owns his own soup kitchen that he works at. And
Little did you know when you started writing, you were going to do Bon Jovi research. It's amazing.
If my internet history ever got seized, I don't even know how I would explain it to somebody who wasn't a writer. It makes sense if you're a writer, and that's pretty much the only way it makes sense.
You were talking earlier about how you wanted to write a book where there was a big cast. But there's so many different types of personalities in this. Were these similar to people that you worked at the video store? It seems so natural that they were all kind of at the video store together, and you mentioned you worked there. Were there some inspirations? Did you just kind of come up with them on your own?
There are absolutely zero parallels between the people who work at ROYO and the people who worked at the video store that I worked at.
Okay.
The only character who is based on a real person in this book is the Godfather. I had a student once who would dress and behave very similarly to the way the Godfather in the book does. And so when I was just kind of thinking who I wanted to work at the store, I just thought, wow, that would be super interesting to have this kind of person here. But mostly I was drawing on just the idea of, I mean, we don't even really have this anymore, where like the teen spot, like the place that all the teens work, you know, in like the 50s, it was like the diner, or like the 70s, it was like the roller rink or the disco, and the 80s, it was the record store, and then like the 90s, it was the video store. And it drew, like those places always drew from like a wide swath of types of people. It wasn't just like all of the jocks work there or all of the nerds work there. It was just kind of a sampling of all kinds of people from that decade. And so I was trying to include a variety of types of people who might have all worked together. And I feel like we miss out on that now. We're not really forced a lot, especially once we're out of high school, to be around people who we don't choose to be around. A lot of us work from home, and the only time we even connect with other people is online. So
I did notice that, like a clash of characters, but they had to make it work because that's where they worked, and they couldn't just be like, all right, I'm not doing it anymore. They needed
and even by the end, I feel like there was some kind of affection that they all had for one another, that extended beyond just like, well, we have to get along because we work here, but like they actually appreciated each other. I kind of miss that.
Yeah, and speaking again of all the different characters, I absolutely love the different points of view from the different types of characters. I interviewed an author one time for, I've had multiple authors say to me they love giving their characters, even their biggest protagonists, major flaws, because that they're the writer. They get to do this. And this book is no exception. There are some very flawed characters. How is that process for you, with giving your characters their goods and then their bads as well?
Well, when I approach writing a character, my number one goal is to always make them as authentic as possible. And there's no authenticity without flaws, because no person is perfect. And at the same time, no one wants to read a story about someone who's perfect. Like, there's nothing to relate to in that. Mm-hmm. Particularly writing a story about the 90s, there's definitely going to be some differences between characters and how they speak and interact then, and their views and opinions, especially on social issues, as compared to now. And so it was tricky at times to kind of toe the line between, would this be something realistic that somebody would do or say back then? But is it too harmful to include it in the very authentic way that they would have done or said something? So that was a little tricky. Also trying to toe the line on what my editor calls Joel's male gaze, Gaze. So the way that he kind of observes women was tricky at times too. But again, this was a guy from the 90s, and I was trying to be as authentic as I could be with that.
And was it always a plan to write the characters write the book from a male character's point of view?
Yeah, I mean, when I thought about the voice from which I wanted to tell the story, I felt that it needed to be from an experience that wasn't my own. I wanted that challenge, and I thought that Joel sounded like Joel as a male character sounded really interesting to try to explore.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agreed. It was an incredible character. And you mentioned social issues. This book deals with some major, deep issues. And when I finished it, I thought I would have enjoyed it even if it didn't. I would have thought it was a great, fun book. But because it did, it felt important. Was your plan always to kind of have the deepness of the book, or did that kind of develop as you went along?
I knew I wanted to tackle things that as they were in the 90s. And I think that there are some social issues that you just can't avoid when you're talking about that decade, especially if you're trying to draw a comparison between then and now. And so as I was exploring the idea of what was wrong with Joel and the bad thing that happened, there were some ideas that I tossed around early that just didn't feel authentic to me. And then when I had like a better view of who Joel was as a person and the family that he came from, it all just kind of made sense to me. And so I don't know that I can write a story that doesn't go deep on certain areas. Like I'm not drawn to that. I really like stories that are kind of fluffy and like that don't rip your heart out sometimes, but I just like, that's not the kind of writer. I'm not in that phase right now. This isn't my rip your heart out phase, I think.
I'm an elementary school librarian, so I get a lot of fluff, beautiful fluff. But this book,
there's a lot of beautiful fluff.
Yeah, there is a lot of beautiful fluff. This is definitely not a book for children, and so you definitely have your audience. And is this an exciting audience for you to write to? Just from an older high school, an older type of generation?
Yeah, so my background is actually in high school teaching. That was what I went to school for, and I love that age group. I love teenagers because it's such a time of possibility. And so I'm constantly drawn back to writing from that vantage point of being on the precipice of adulthood and and just there being so much possibility about what could happen next and what kind of person am I going to be. And so I love that. At the same time, I feel like this particular story, and I don't think this is necessarily true of all YA. I mean, adults can certainly read all of YA, and a lot of them do. But I feel like this story is kind of like a generation gap story, where so far I would say the majority of my readers are from Generation X. You know, they're the ones who were teenagers at this age. And they bring their whole selves when they read the story. And that means they have like memories of this time. And there's very different perspectives between the adults who read the story and the teenagers who read it now. And what I hope happens for people who are from both those generations is that there's conversation that occurs, because I know there's times, especially with issues that they deal with in the book, there's times that it feels like we've come so far. And then there are times that it feels like we've, barely moved the mark at all from where we were. But, I just hope that this story can be used in conversation to continue to, for continued progress in a lot of those areas.
Yeah, and there were times while reading the book that I had to remember it was coming from a 90s point of view. It wasn't trying to fake that whatsoever. This is what people thought and believed at that time. And I thought that you did a wonderful job really focusing in on what people believed at that time. You mentioned the kind of coming of ageness, almost John Hughes-like, which is mentioned in the book a few times. When I finished the book, I was getting glimpses of a mixture of Empire Records and High Fidelity, maybe a little Juno and some Say Anything. That was kind of what was coming to my mind. Were there movies and TV shows or books or that were kind of going through your mind a little bit when you were writing?
Yeah. So, I mean, you said Empire Records. That was definitely the strongest influence in this book. I've always loved that movie. I love that the record store is a character in that story. And I love, like, I tried to kind of model my characters after just the different walks of life that all of them come from, but they all have this similar goal of making the store work. So that was definitely an influence. I'm not sure that any other movie influenced as much as that, but I definitely like the movie Singles.
Yeah.
It's often called one of the few movies that gets labeled as a grunge movie from the early 90s.
Okay.
And that story,
there was a lot of flannel in that movie.
There's a lot of flannel. That story, the characters are set a little older. They're in their young to mid 20s, and so they're kind of in a different age bracket than my characters. But definitely the aesthetic I really loved from Singles, and kind of drew from that when I was writing the story.
Yeah, and the record store, but also the city of Royal Oak itself plays a nice character in the story. And it seems like it fit perfect in Royal Oak, but I can imagine that it could have fit in many other big city border towns at that 90s time. Did your relationship with Royal Oak help shape the story as well?
Sure, but not necessarily. I mean, I had no experience with Royal Oak in the 90s. I didn't grow up around here. I didn't move to Metro Detroit until 2005.
Oh,
so the first time I came to Royal Oak was 2004. And from like the first time that I kind of stepped out onto like Main Street, 4th Street, Washington Street, I just like, I felt, oh, I wish I had been a teenager here. Like this place is just so cool.
Right.
And I mean, it's changed a lot even in the last 16 years. I feel like it's kind of moving further away from that like small, like grungy artist type of town that I kind of had it pegged when I first moved here. I mean, but I still love it. And, of all the places I've been to in Michigan, that just felt like the best setting for this story.
Yeah. There's so much about this book that we literally just can't talk about.
Right.
There's twists or reveals or the wonderful things that books can do. So that's one of the reasons I really recommend checking it out. I picked it up a few times over a couple of days, but once I got to about the middle of the book, I didn't set it down. I just blazed through the second half of the book because I felt like I was working at the video store and I didn't want to miss my shift. Like I had to get back to the characters. So I highly recommend checking it out. Lisabeth, is there anything else that you wanted to mention? I don't really have any more questions, but is there something that you would like to say?
I know that we had talked about doing a reading, and so I was trying to find a section of the book that I could read without giving anything away. And so I did find
without getting bleeped too much as well.
Right. There's also that. There is a lot of language in the book, more so than I use in my everyday life, I should say. Yeah, so I was going to do a short reading from the beginning of the book, and it actually takes place right after Joel has been hired at the video store, and he's hired by his cousin Devin's girlfriend, and her name is Jessica Morrison. She's explaining to him why she's not called Jessica at work, and how he needs to choose another name to be addressed at the store as well. So I've just got a couple of pages that I'll read from there. Okay. I knew from Devin that the Morrisons owned the entire block of businesses that ROYO Video was on, but that was all I really knew about them. It seemed weird that they made their employees take on aliases just to work at a video store, but whatever. This was my first job, and what the hell did I know? Well, I've always liked the name Mike. Mike was a normal guy name. I could be a Mike. What? No, Jessica laughed. You have to choose a movie character name. It sets the mood for renting videos, subliminal advertising. Oh, I guess this made sense. So does that mean you aren't Jessica here? On the clock, I'm Scarlett. She pointed at her own name badge, which I had been avoiding looking at it because of its proximity to her breasts. As in Scarlett O'Hara. I'd never watched Gone with the Wind, but now I was tempted to. We've also got a Dirty Harry, my stupid little brother Scott. Then there's The Godfather, Mary Poppins, Hannibal, and Baby. Baby? It's from Dirty Dancing? Jessica Scarlett looked disgusted, the way all girls did when you didn't know something about Dirty Dancing. Oh, I've never seen it. You're missing out. I doubted it. So is there like a list of names to pick from? No, you just can't have you just can't have one that someone else is already using, she said impatiently, indicating the Sharpie in her hand. So what'll it be? I tried to think fast. James Bond, Rocky Balboa, and RoboCop flew through my head, but they all seemed too audacious for a guy like me, fresh out of the psych ward. Jack Nicholson's character from One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest was maybe more apropos, but I couldn't remember his name. What's your favorite movie? Jessica Scarlett helped me along. Star Wars. She was unimpressed. So what, like Luke Skywalker? No, I suddenly had a strong opinion on the subject. Han Solo. Okay, she wrote Hans Solo in wet black letters, then waved the badge in the air to dry it. But Skywalker sounds way sexier. I would have corrected her spelling, but the word sex had derailed my thoughts. Welcome to ROYO Video, Hans, Scarlett said, handing me my name tag. Come in tomorrow. Look for Baby. She'll be training you. I'll be here. So that was the end of chapter 1. So that's about as far as I could go into the book without spoiling something.
Yeah, since I know, that's where when we discussed a little bit about doing a passage, I started flipping through it. I'm like, I think we're going to have to go really towards the beginning without giving away too much. Thank you very much for talking.
Yeah, thanks for all your questions and for reading the story. I don't know if anybody who's watching has any questions, or if they've been putting them in the chat. There's Matt.
Hi, Matt.
I haven't received any yet, so if any of the audience wants to ask questions, feel free to throw those in the chat or unmute or whatever you'd like to do.
I will say in the meantime that I'm doing a giveaway right now on my Instagram account, which is my name, Lisabeth Posthuma _ and then the word rights, WRITES, where I assume that most people watching this at this point have already read Baby and Solo and maybe already have their own copy. So I'm giving away some very limited edition enamel pins of the book cover. And I'll draw one winner for that, and then they get to choose a friend, and I'll send an autographed copy of the book to the friend. So if you're not already following me on Instagram, you can head over there and enter it very easily. That's going to be open until July 1st, which is Thursday. I'll pick the winner then.
And for those that don't have a copy, available Amazon, where can you find the book?
Okay. Well, I would first direct everyone to Toadvine. There are some copies there that are already autographed, and they're autographed with some book plates. The book plate is actually a ROYO video employee name tag.
Nice.
So those are in there. So that's where I would direct you to first. But other than Toadvine, they are the books available everywhere books are sold. It's at Books A Million, Second and Charles, all the Barnes and Nobles, and then pretty much anywhere online that you would find books.
Awesome.
And also, if you have read it and you're so inclined, the best way to support an author, especially a debut author, is by word of mouth. And one of the best ways you can do that is to review it online. If you have a Goodreads account, that is a fantastic place to say how you feel about the story. Also, even if you didn't purchase the book from Amazon, I believe that you can leave a review there. And all of that really helps get some attention to the story. Last, I read an article, actually it was sent to me by my editor, and it was kind of a sad article that said that 2020 and 2021 are shaping up to be the hardest years in the history of publication for debut authors. 98% of book sales in the last year were to known authors, and most of that 98% were celebrities or cookbooks. So people who kind of already have a huge following. And so that meant that debut authors accounted for only 2% of all book sales last year and this year. So it's really difficult to fight for attention as a debut author, especially because there's no in-person touring, there's no conferences, school visits, all that kind of got slashed this year. So, and not just for baby and solo, but if you're someone who has discovered a new author or an artist this year, sing their praises as loudly as you can to as many people as you can, and they will be indebted to you forever, because it is really hard out there right now.
All right, I've got a question.
Okay.
This is from Shelly. She asks, what's one of the best things you've experienced since Baby and Solo released last month?
Hi, Shelly. Shelly is my author friend. She's the author of, I'm assuming it's the Shelly. I'm like 100% sure it's the Shelly. She's the author of Beatrice Thinker Upside Down Thinker series, and she also had a picture book come out this year, which is fantastic, called More Than Sunny, and you definitely need to buy it. So aside from the fact that our books came out on the same day and that we got to share our book birthday together, I will say that the most exciting thing that's happened so far are really the emails that I've gotten from readers. Never underestimate how much it means to a creator for someone to tell them that their art has meant something, that it has meaning in someone else's life. And that is why creators create things. And I've received, multiple messages through my website or through social media that have expressed those feelings. And that it will never not mean a lot to me to hear from somebody who this meant something to.
Great, good. Thank you all so much. This has been a great evening.
Thank you all for being here. Thank you, Dan. Thank you, Berkeley Public Library and Matt for arranging this. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for thinking of me. I appreciate it as well.
All right. Have a great night, everyone. Thank you.
All right, you too.
Bye, everyone.